Welcome to the CyberRants podcast, where we're all about sharing the forbidden secrets and slightly embellished truths about corporate cybersecurity programs. We're ranting, we're raving, and we're telling you the stuff that nobody talks about on their fancy website and trade show giveaways, all to protect you from cyber criminals. And now, here's your hosts, Mike Rotondo, Zach Fuller, and Lauro Chavez.
Hello and welcome back to the CyberRants podcast. Hope you've been enjoying our first episode this year and our crystal ball predictions. So episode number 2 for 2022 here. This is your co-host, Zach Fuller, joined by Mike Rotondo and Lauro Chavez. And today we're just going to go with it. We're going to talk about some of the news, some of the exploits, and just let the conversation flow, see what comes out. So before we dive in, Mike, do you want to kick us off with the news?
I don't even know how to preface this first story. According to the FBI, cyber criminals are mailing out USB drives that install ransomware. Let me just first start with a disclaimer. If someone emails you or mails you a USB drive, don't plug it in unless you know that person. The cybercrime group has been mailing out USB thumb drives in the hope that recipients will plug them into their PCs and install ransomware on their networks, according to the FBI. The USB drives contain so-called bad USB attacks. They were sent in the mail through the Postal Service and UPS. One type contained a message impersonating the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and claimed to be a COVID-19 warning. Other malicious USBs were sent in the post with a gift card claiming to be from Amazon. So once again, if someone sends you a USB, don't plug it in.
Yeah, or if you find one. Yeah. And just to add to that, turning off auto run for USBs is not going to stop this type of attack.
Especially not if it's a rubber ducky.
Yeah, or a bash punch.
Yeah, those you can find more information on at Hack5. They're the ones who developed that, not Silent Sector. We knew this was going to happen eventually. Breach response shift, more lawyers, less cyber insurance coverage. The face of data breach investigation is changing as companies weigh business factors outside of the traditional Office of Information Security. Following a breach, companies are no longer likely to make their first call to an incident response firm, but rather to an outside attorney. A trend that legally protects businesses, but could make the technical response more difficult. And faced with large claims from ransomware incidents, cyber insurers have raised rates while adding more limits to new and renewed policies. Overall, the two related trends mean that companies are more worried about the impact of compromise in the form of lawsuits and higher insurance premiums. Insurance firms are also seeing thousands of cyber breaches handled by outside attorneys rather than an outside technical consultant. The idea is that a lot of these incidents were breaches of personal information, and those resulted in class action lawsuits. They're looking for how do we protect as much of our investigation as possible using attorney-client privilege.
It's interesting. So I guess one of our crystal ball things came true, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's always been the right way to do it. I'm kind of surprised that people are just catching on now, right? I mean, you've always wanted that data to have attorney-client privilege. I don't want to get on a soapbox here. Let's continue with the news, man. Maybe we can talk about that in the episode.
And then from another one of our our crystal ball predictions, hey, here's a bunch of Microsoft problems. Remote access Trojans spread through Microsoft Azure AWS cloud service abuse. Hackers use cloud services to distribute nanocore, netwire, and async rat malware. A recent campaign, those are two headlines that I'm combined into one story. A recent campaign leveraging public cloud infrastructure is deploying not one, but 3 commercial remote access Trojans or rats. Nanocore, netwire, and async rat payloads are being deployed from public cloud systems in what Cisco Talos suggests is a way for cyber attackers to avoid having to own or manage their own private paid infrastructure, such as through bulletproof housing, which may eventually capture the interest of law enforcement. The abuse allows cyber criminals to leverage the resources of cloud services managed by vendors, including Microsoft Azure and AWS, for malicious purposes. First patch Tuesday of 2022 brings fix for critical wormable Windows vulnerabilities. Microsoft on Tuesday kicked off its first set of updates for 2022 by plugging 96 security holes across the software ecosystem, while urging customers to prioritize patching for what it calls a critical wormable vulnerability.
I said, told you so.
Yeah. Of the 96 vulnerabilities, 9 are rated critical and 89 are rated important in severity, with 6 zero-day publicly known at this time. This is in addition to 29 issues patched in Microsoft Edge on January 6th. None of the disclosed bugs are currently listed as under attack, right? Patches cover Microsoft Windows, Windows Components, Exchange Server, Office Components, SharePoint, .NET, Microsoft Dynamics, open source software, Windows Hyper-V, Windows Defender, and of course, RDP. There's some additional Microsoft issues out there. There's a new Windows release that updates Windows update that breaks L2TP VPN connections. Phishers are targeting Office 365 users by exploiting the Adobe Cloud. And there's a ransomware out there targeting edge users. So with that, Lauro.
Well, I got a good dovetail from the Microsoft, because that is the two exploits I want to talk about today. Hacker Hyperlinks has posted 2 working exploits for a Microsoft Windows Defender detection bypass. Okay, this works on all versions of Windows, on all versions of Windows Defender, and with some clever JavaScript using the run DLL32exe, you can bypass Windows Defender with your Nano Core. So that that's pretty serious. So make sure, I'm not 100% sure if the patches that Microsoft is talking about are going to address this or not. But in any case, make sure that you're patching all of your Windows machines, especially if you're using Windows Defender. The other one is a Windows .reg file dialog spoof mitigation bypass. Okay, so typically when you're writing to the registry and you go to save that, you get a warning that pops up, says, "Are you sure you want to continue?" This particular exploit allows the attacker to control that dialog box, so they can change that warning message instead to read like, click yes to abort, or click yes to whatever. They can essentially change that language to make it look like, in fact, they are importing a necessary change. So when Nano Cortex comes down and it's got the Windows Defender bypass built into the code, and now it writes to the registry and it's going to pop up that block, right? So there are a lot of fake patches and fake software that they're leveraging to write these rats into the operating system through the registry, and then they're changing the dialog box on you to kind of show that it's something. This is okay to do this, but it's really not, right? So keep that in mind. Make sure you're patching Windows if you didn't know to patch Windows already. But those are the 2 most important Windows exploits and exploits in general that I have for this week. Zach, I think we're going to do a open forum discussion today about.
Want even more CyberRants? Be sure to subscribe to the CyberRants podcast. Get your copy of our best-selling book, CyberRants, on Amazon today. This podcast is brought to you by Silent Sector, a firm dedicated to building world-class cybersecurity programs for mid-market and emerging companies across the U.S. Silent Sector also provides industry-leading penetration tests and cyber risk assessments. Visit silentsector.com and contact us today.
We can certainly do that. But first, I want to say, I think many of our predictions for the year are already coming true a week later. So now, granted, they were pretty obvious, right? Because we were last episode, we were sticking with the things that, let's focus on what we know to be true, what we know with, I shouldn't say what we know, but what we are very confident will happen, right? And let's prepare for those things. So there you go. Patch your Windows systems. That's like the most basic of fundamentals, right? But anyway, interesting stuff. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I think there are a lot of issues coming up. I just seeing that article, Mike, that you shared about incident response. I find it a little bit amusing, but a little bit scary that companies are just now learning to go to attorneys when they need forensics work, rather than just go call out any consultant or whatever to come in. I thought that. Used to think that was common knowledge or something that people would just do, but apparently not.
My concern is that the technical resources really need to be the first thing on the ground. If you wait for lawyers to move and do their thing, I mean, depending on what kind of, if there's something that's dedicated to kind of cyber response and they have like fast acting parachute teams or something of that nature, that's one thing. But if you're just going to your random, Jacoby and Myers or whatever and saying, "Hey, I need you to help me with this breach mitigation," that's not good, right?
No, it's not. Well, what's weird is that I think they're doing this probably to protect the company liability in general, right? Because anytime you make public that there's been a breach, or especially if you're publicly traded, what's going to happen, right? Stocks are going to drop, right? I think the first thing that they typically run out to is the attorney to say, how do we do damage control for this, right? How do we keep our stock prices high while trying to also fix this, horrible breach that's now happened? So I agree with you, Zach. It seemed like that was common knowledge, and so it's interesting to see it.
Yeah, and you have an excellent point too, Mike. And that, I agree 100%. But these companies if they're being proactive, they should have an incident response plan in place, and they should have some very quick points of contact. One being an attorney, right? But also they internally being able to mitigate the breach, stop the spread of damage as it's occurring, right? So there's absolutely your first boots on the ground right there on scene will and should be technical people, but right away an attorney needs to get involved when it starts to come to the investigation of it, right? You never want that information found in the investigation subpoenaed, because then the opposing counsel is going to poke all kinds of holes in your security program and call you negligent, and they're probably going to be right.
Well, that's just my concern. So if you have a strong DR policy, you have a strong IR policy that you've actually practiced, not just written down on paper, you should have those carve-outs already in place, and you should already have that relationship established. The time to try and establish that relationship is not after you've had, a million records exfilled out of your network.
Yeah, it's almost like, I hate to bring COVID into this, right? But they're saying Omicron is probably one of the the most contagious, right? And cyber attacks are like that, right? I mean, you have to look at your company, and there are going to be mistakes made, right? Not just by you and your internal teams, but by your trusted software vendors. I mean, just look at Microsoft. Okay, so if you're running Microsoft, you need to have an incident response plan, and you have, just like you said, Mike, you've got to have these relationships established way ahead of time, because it's only a matter of time, right? And cyber criminals are doing this sort of a shotgun tactic, right, where they're reaching out to a whole bunch of different systems, because if you're plugged into the public fabric, they're going to find you. I mean, even if you've got filtering and you're like, well, I don't allow any traffic from China or Russia or all these different places, that's fine. They're going to use rack space here in the United States. They're going to use Amazon AWS on the East Coast, right? They can also obtain these types of services from us, right? Because, companies like, AWS are not going to say, oh, just because you're from this other country, you can't rent server space over here, right? So they're going to leverage in-country compute in order to carry out these attacks, because they realize, like, well, everybody's blocking our country codes and IP space at the firewall. So, we can't talk to them. So how do you get around that? So it's super important that you have these relationships established, especially if you're using, Microsoft products or you're on cloud. Any type of compute that you've got has to be down in the incident response plan, and it has to reflect the need for what happens when we do get breached. And you certainly need to treat it at what point we get breached. What are we going to do? And Mike, like you said, that's why you have to practice the tabletop exercises. You can't just stack that document in the drawer or on your SharePoint site and hopefully that it's going to be applicable when something actually happens.
Well, and one of the things that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen as well, Laura, as we do our CISO engagements, is that they go and they pay some big company, big security company out there to write this voluminous document so they can check that box, and then they never look at it. Right.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
And that's, one of those things. And I had one client that a very large security company wrote a 75-page disaster recovery document, of which I swear the guy was getting paid by the word. It was useless and had not been tailored to the actual client. So we had to fix that. And we took that 75-page document and turned it into about a 35-page document that actually did something. So, the old joke of having a term paper and holding in your hand and go, well, this feels like a B. Can we add another 20 pages or make it an A? Does not hold true. when it comes to disaster recovery.
That's great. That's a great analogy and so true. Yeah, more words doesn't mean it's going to save you when things go bad. The prop. I mean, I guess just for listeners, right? Because they're probably like, well, then how do we do it? The proper way is to have all of your critical resources, right? Human resources, your attorneys, your IT teams, your cybersecurity teams, your web developers, right? If you're running web apps, the developers need to be involved, and you need to walk down. You can get a template, that's fine, but it needs to be very tailored to the organization. There is no such thing as a generic incident response plan. I mean, it might as well say, okay, run around, waving your hands, help. I mean, it's going to be just as valuable as that. So you unfortunately, you've got to spend time going through and making sure that you've identified your emergency response team. You've identified your emergency response team first responders, right? The ones that are going to look at the incident and decide if we need to bring in more team members. And then, making sure that you've got points of contact in there. And I know, Mike, this is and you're right. I always mention this, right? When we do our CISO activities and we're going through these frameworks and we're getting to incident response, we always mention that, hey, Mike is gonna always tell you to print it out and keep a hard copy, because if you get hit with ransomware and it crypto locks everything with Locker or any other virus out there that does the engagement for the locking of the files, you're not going to be able to get to the incident response file, right? And if you're panicked and you drop your phone, in the sink while you're washing dishes, and when you see this alert come through, and you grab it with your soapy hands, and now your phone's fried, how are you going to call your team? Right. So it sounds, I don't want to say old tech, right? But it does, when you think about printing stuff out today, right, on an actual printer, it's like, why? We've got PDF files. It's actually, this is the one document that you should find the single printer that you've got, or run down to like a UPS store and actually have it printed out and give a copy to everybody who's on that first responders list, right? So that they have a copy at home, someplace safe, that if something happens and they lose a technology device that's critical, they still have a method to call necessary points of contacts like the FBI and cyber insurance, and of course your attorneys, right?
Exactly.
It makes great wallpaper for the office too. You can tile the office wall with it and have it there always for the people that are actually in the office these days, which is fewer and fewer. But yeah, that's an excellent point. I think a lot of people get tied up in the digital realm and forget that you need to really have contingency and emergency plans, right? PACE plans, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. So something kind of just struck my mind while you're talking about the kind of the team and keyword being relationships. And I was thinking, I've never actually sat down and mapped out relationships, but if we were to kind of draw out the cybersecurity family, you have we've talked in the past about your architects, engineers, analysts, project managers, kind of that immediate cybersecurity family, but we haven't really talked about all the additional people that are maybe third parties or outside of the organization that you should have access to and be in touch with on a somewhat frequent basis, maybe quarterly or twice a year. But who else should people know? That their attorney, right, their insurance provider, probably an incident response company that's approved by their insurance provider.
Yeah, that's a good catch right there too, because it has to be approved.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe product vendors, maybe your
well, you need, like, so if you're cloud-based, you need a contact at AWS, not help@aws.com, right? You need a contact of who to reach out to. You need to know your sales rep. You need to know those sort of people at the cloud services. You need to have a communications plan and know that your marketing team knows what their communication plan is for how you work through your reputational salvage.
Yeah, and I was going to say web applications. So, a lot of organizations have a third party dealing with their business web page, right? That's kind of out there in the internet, their marketing page for their business, and they're dealing with a third party, right? And we see issues happening there, right? So, as an example, maybe your marketing site's got a, jobs for hire, please upload your resume here. Well, we've done a lot of uploader abuse lately. Okay. And so when we do penetration testing, that is one of the first things that I look for is your uploader. And I can abuse that in a lot of ways. I don't really need to get into all that, but the thing is that if that happens and you've got this public accessible uploader and somebody uploads, something like, the iMessage hack, right? Where you've got malicious code to pull down nano cortex embedded in an image or embedded in a Word doc. You don't have the sanitization processes on the back end of that uploader to deal with it. They can hook your website. And so if that's handled by a third party, you need to know who you're going to call to say, hey, our website is having problems right now. So, certainly keep that in mind, even if it's, if you've got somebody managing your LinkedIn pages or, anything else that, that pertains to the business and it's like, I'll call it like social facing marketing sites. Make sure you have all those contacts there, because that's probably going to be one of the key places that gets hit. And it's probably going to be out of your greater security boundary, right? Where you may have everything secured and you've got net scalers and all this stuff, right? And, the business is great, but then your marketing site gets hit because it's being taken care of by, schmo then in this garage because it was the cheapest method. And that's what your sales guys went with, right? So keep that in mind. That's okay if you want to use schmo's garage style marketing site maintenance. That's great. Just make sure you can call schmo when something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Schmo also develops WordPress websites as well. So if you want help in that area,
You don't want to use the director of marketing's nephew.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, so we're always trying to talk about different topics that are relevant that people ask about, and that we just see out there in the cybersecurity and tech community, what's on people's minds. And so switching gears a little bit, so we talked about a little bit about incident response today. If we're to switch gears and look at a different side of the equation, and that's using cybersecurity to drive revenue, to drive business, one of the things that we're hearing more and more of from customers is just the sheer amount of security questionnaires that they're getting from their clients, and they're getting more they're getting under more scrutiny as far as how they fill those out. And so I was hoping to switch gears a little bit today while we have time and just talk about dealing and managing large volumes of security questionnaires. Of course, you could always hire a silent sector. That aside, what would your recommendations be? What would you tell somebody that's getting inundated with security questionnaires, trying to drive the business forward, and it's soaking up a lot of their time, taken away from their day-to-day operations?
Well, part of the problem is that sometimes these security questionnaire companies want their specific format done, right? Not a ad hoc, because one of the things that I would advocate for is you create a standard response to the top 20 questions you could answer the most. I have a SOC 2, I am PCI compliant, I, this, that, and the other thing. And you list out those answers and you send that back and hope that they just say, oh, okay, that's fine. The problem you run into is when people want their specific format filled out. And so that's one of the time consuming. However, you can still create cheat sheets of those answers. So it's just a copy paste. And
yeah, right, Mike. Yeah, the copy pasta is probably one of the better ways. It's still time consuming though. And here's the thing is that your government security, your governance and security engineers are cantankerous. Okay. We have to do a risk sheet, right? A risk matrix on your business. That if you're getting a security questionnaire, that means the organization's pretty mature. They have a process that says until we get these answers back, we review the answers and we rank the organization on a risk level. You can't do business with them. That has to happen. And we deal with this all the time, right? I mean, that's like Zach said, if this is overwhelming you can reach out to us. We can certainly help you. But unfortunately, sometimes like the top 20 things, like you said, Mike, you can put it on your website and just point them to it. And they say, yeah, that's great. We still need you to fill out this questionnaire.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And what what drives me batty is that these teams don't tailor the questions for the type of business that's being assessed. Yes. They're going to send you a massive questionnaire with, like, I've seen them as high as 315. I've spent 5 to 6 hours filling out questionnaires on some of these online tools because, they're just like, we'll just send them the generic template that's got 300 questions in it. So you might as well be going through a NIST 853 assessment at that point. Right. And unfortunately, that is the step you have to take if you want to do business with that particular client. Yeah. If that is one of their prerequisites, you better fill it out. And furthermore, there's Zach, there's not an easy way. It's just a time monster. You have to do it, right? It's like, if you go to buy a car, what do you got to do? You got to fill out the loan stuff. You're not going to just look at your credit score and be like, okay, here you go. You have to fill out the whole loan application every time you do this, right? I mean, and it's same for a home or anything else. That's the same process here. It doesn't matter if it's 15 questions or 1,500 questions. You've got to answer them all. And that has to go back to the client security team to review. They're going to review those answers. They're going to give you a risk score based on what answers you give. That's going to go to the greater security team. And they're going to look at this and say, okay, hey, this company answered no on everything. It's probably high risk to do business with them. And we've talked about this before. They're going to go find somebody else that may be more expensive that can answer the questionnaire better than you, that has better answers in the questionnaire. Okay. And get off my soapbox for a minute, right? I'm taking time here. I apologize. But eventually this is already evolving into video meetings, right? Over Zoom or any of the other ones where the security team is meeting with you. They want to see your documents. They're not saying, do you have a security policy? Yes or no? Yes. Upload it. Okay. So I'm completely against data hoarding. You should not be uploading all your documents to this company. Okay. They're going to stick them on a SharePoint site and they're going to forget about them. And now your data is just going to be living there. Okay. The mature process that is coming, that I'm hoping, this is one of my predictions, right? That I'm going to throw in from the last episode that I don't think I talked about, but I see this actually maturing into a place where they're going to do a video screen sharing session audit with you. They're going to very concisely tailor based on what type of services you're going to provide. Okay. Whether that's, you're doing managed IT for them, or you're just building a website, right? So instead of maybe 300 questions, you're getting 15 questions, but they're going to meet with you on a Zoom meeting or whatever else. And they're going to say, okay, do you have a security policy? Yes. Okay. Show it to me. I need to take a screenshot of the front page just to make sure that it's got date stamps and you've reviewed it and it's an actual security policy. They want to see that. They want to see the pen test reports. They're going to ask to review these things with you in a session, just like we would come in and do an assessment for anything, right? We're going to ask you for burden of proof. We need to see these things. You can't just say, yeah, I have it. Okay, so the questionnaire is evolving. You can't just say yes, yes, yes on all of these answers and expect them to just take it for face value. There
was a time when you could do that, but not anymore.
No, exactly, Mike. Your time to do that is limited now.
Yeah. I hope they get to a point where they've tailored this, because I've been through that issue with multiple companies where they ask this giant questionnaire that has nothing to do with the services being consumed. And it's a complete waste of time, because one of the things that I've seen developing is this group of intermediary companies that large company A engages this intermediary company to talk to small company B and do their security questionnaire. Well, the intermediary company has no idea what services are being consumed, what they're doing, why, or where, and doesn't care. So they want to check all the boxes. In reality, if you spoke directly to company A, you may be able to work around some of this stuff, saying, you're not even using these systems. What do you care what I do with them? They're not integrated. And I've gone through this with a couple of clients recently, and it's just like, you finally have to get back to the company and say, look, this is what you're doing, right? I'm not storing any critical data. I'm not storing any regulated data for you. Why do you need to see how I store and manage my regulated data? It has nothing to do with what you're doing. Yeah, so, The other thing that I'm thinking of, and I'd like to see, although that makes a lot of work for us, is that if we're going to go to that Zoom module or model of screen sharing of over Teams or wherever, is that I believe policies will have to change the format where you're going to start out with now an executive summary that they can screenshot, kind of like we do with our letters of attestation or pen test reports. That has an executive summary that they can screenshot and see, that has a date and timestamp and gives a little overview of the policy, and then the actual policy will follow.
Yeah, but this is just this whole process right now. I mean, if you want to talk about a time killer in the cybersecurity compliance space right now, the questionnaires is a huge hurdle to get over, especially when you're getting 5-6 a week, because you're awesome and everybody wants to use your business, and you're just getting inundated with these questionnaires. It becomes a full-time job for two people just to answer them. So my hope is that, and it is happening, right? I mean, this evolution is already in place. It just hasn't overtaken the whole industry yet. But there are large companies who have figured this out, and now they're saying, okay, well, what we want to do business with this company. Okay, that's great. What kind of services are they going to offer us? Oh, it's just a website. Okay, fantastic. Now, out of the 300 questions I've got, I can tailor that down to 25. I can meet with the client. I can ask them and ask them for the burden of proof, take my screenshots and be done with it, right? And it's a more accurate risk assessment, because that's really what it is, right? They're conducting a risk assessment, and right now it's a shotgun approach, right? They're asking 300 questions, of which 220 may not applicable, and so this evolution is already in place, and it's going to continue to evolve to the point where the most efficient manners are going to be to have that screen sharing session with you, right, Mike, and check that executive summary and just be done.
I mean, I've seen questionnaires that have things like, how many floors does your office building have? Who really cares?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. I mean, why is that even relevant?
It kind of like that incident response plan or the disaster recovery plan you were talking about earlier. Somebody thought more is better, and that's certainly not the case. But I think it's interesting too, because if you think about it, you look at it from a business perspective, the questionnaires, you got to think about who needs who more, right? So if what's happening with these software companies that are maybe early stage or mid-market, they're getting inundated with the security questionnaires because they need the business of the large enterprise. But when you want to use Google Workspace, for example, go try to get Google to fill out your security questionnaire,
no doubt.
right? See, because now you need them, right? They don't need you. And it's the same thing for consumers, right? Consumers are people using SaaS that's like your, $8 a month subscriptions or $100 a month subscription kind of stuff for small businesses. Those companies aren't going to fill out security questionnaires for the small ticket customers either. So it's really that niche, it's that space, that's that B2B going after larger enterprise, and they need those customers. And I think it'll be interesting to see over time, but I agree with you 100%, Laura. Just having different categories of questionnaires for the larger organizations makes perfect sense because it saves them time as well. But it'll be interesting to see too, with the progress of all different kinds of audits and third-party attestations. I mean, that hasn't quite solved the problem, but maybe there will be some sort of magic formula that people actually start to trust eventually. I don't know, but it would be nice to see that. And then having some sort of method, or when you put yourself in the business owners or leadership's perspective, some sort of method early on to say, hey, this is how we handle security questionnaires. We don't fill them out. We don't fill them out specifically, but we have all the same data here, and it's on the company. I think you can only do that when you get to a certain size, or when you get to a certain point where you are the expert in your space. You are the best tool, the best possibility for them. And I think some of these larger organizations might bend their rules a little bit, like they have to do with their bigger vendors. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. But before we jump off here today, any final thoughts or words of wisdom for the listeners?
Well, practice your incident response plan, tailor it to your company. And the more detailed answers you give in a security questionnaire, the better chances you have of landing that contract. A simple yes or a no is just not going to do it. If the control is not applicable to you, you need to explain why it's not applicable. So the best thing to do is to take the biggest questionnaire you got and answer all the questions as thoroughly as you can, and then replay those answers into other questionnaires as you see they fit.
Yeah, just store them somewhere in a SharePoint site or wherever, someplace secure.
Yeah.
I can honestly say, going back to your talk about the big companies, Zach, I've gotten a SOC 2 report one time from one of the large cloud providers, one time, but that's because we were working for a massive company, and it was big dollars, and I got them to acquiesce, and they wouldn't fill out the questionnaire, but they would provide the actual documentation.
So they were able to send you an email. That's big of them.
Well, yeah, with the SOC 2 report attached. So, I mean,
Yep.
that was actually pretty, I mean, but to even get that concession from them was, I mean, if it had not been working for the company the size I was working for,
Yep.
they'd have still told me to pound sand. So,
yeah, it's all in the positioning. And I'm sure the level of risk, if you're in even a smaller company, but has the only service or product of its kind, and that the larger enterprise is sold on it, they'll probably be willing to take on a little more risk as opposed to having a plethora of options. So I think as a business owner, or leadership, you have to understand where you fit in that space and what you're able to get away with. But go ahead.
One more thing is that I find it ironic or coincidental or interesting that these big companies that refuse to provide the security questionnaires get breached an awful lot.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yep. Well, it probably just reduces their liability, right? Because they're not having to answer to all these questions all the time. So if it's not in writing, it becomes a little less serious. Can't be held against them. So. Well, that said, I hope everybody enjoyed the podcast and is having a good year so far. Remember, the news articles that Mike shares are on the website and listed in the podcast postings at cyberrantspodcast.com. Be sure to follow or subscribe to the episodes, rate them, let us know your comments, feedback, thoughts, ideas, stuff that you want to hear about for future episodes. And we will see you next week.
Pick up your copy of the CyberRants book on Amazon today. And if you're looking to take your cybersecurity program to the next level, visit us online at www.silentsector.com. Join us next time for another edition of the CyberRants podcast.